Welcome to the Storytelling That Sticks for Business and Life podcast. I'm your keynote, TED Talk and story coach, Doug Stevenson. In this podcast series, I'm going to share with you some simple and practical storytelling techniques and hacks that will make you stand out from the competition so that you can get paid to speak, or to give a TED Talk that goes viral, or to simply tell your story in a way that makes a difference in the world. You'll learn how to choose, craft, and deliver stories that stick. Personal stories from your amazing life, business stories, leadership and sales stories, stories that are marketable and memorable, stories that sell you and your product or service. My job as your virtual keynote and story coach is to help you design and deliver stories and speeches that get people to do what you want them to do, or to consider a new perspective. If you're serious about using storytelling to advance your career, to get paid to speak, or simply to get your message across in a more engaging and compelling manner, this podcast is for you. All right, well, let's get started. Episode 42. 12 story types, part 2. Okay, so this is great. So we've covered the first 4 story types in part 1. Let's keep it going, okay? Let's keep it going with 8 more story types. Now, I hope this triggers some good memories and gets you excited about developing some of these stories so that you can share them with your audience members and your friends and your coworkers. And who knows, maybe even change some lives and make a difference in the world. So you ready? Here we go. Number 5, the origin story. An origin story is the backstory of how someone became who they are. It's more than a biography because it's not simply a list of a sequence of events that shape someone's identity and personality. No. It goes deeper. It goes deeper into the meaningful and often painful or traumatic events that cause someone to make the choices they made on the road to their current reality. Now, for those of us who watched the TV series The Crown for 6 seasons, you were watching the origin story of Queen Elizabeth and her family, her children, and all of the intrigue surrounding the royal family, the relationships. But at its core, it was the origin story of the reign of Queen Elizabeth. Your origin story is the story of your life, broken into scenes depicting those moments, those relationships, the things that happened, who was there, what was said, how did you interpret what was said, what events shaped you, all of that. And as you set about crafting your own origin story, you're going to find it hard to know what you include and what you leave out, because it's your entire life story after all. So the first decision you need to make is this: what's the point? Why are you telling your origin story? What is it going to lead to? What is the lesson that you want to use it to tell? And that determines what goes in and what stays out. Now, an origin story can also be the backstory of a product, such as a drug like penicillin, or a process like how Steve Jobs and his engineers figured out, and this still blows me away, how they figured out how to turn songs and music into MP3s, and then to get thousands of those songs into a tiny device called an iPod. That just blows me away that there are songs on my phone, hundreds of songs and photos on my phone and videos. That just blows me away. So an origin story could be the process of how they figured out how to do that. Now, if you're in sales, you can craft the origin story of your product or service by telling the backstory of how your product came to be developed, by whom and why. It can include the vision of the original founders of your company and what details you need to create the emotional connection between you and your company, your product, and the needs of your customers. So that's origin stories. They can really be great. And people love to hear origin stories. Number 6, pattern stories. Pattern stories are fun to craft and even more fun to tell. They're like a good whodunit mystery novel or movie where the plot unfolds over time, over a series of scenes that all have a similar pattern. They're constructed with a series of mini stories or segments that illustrate how the same problem, the same obstacle, the same challenge keeps happening over and over while the person or organization experiencing the problem fails to learn the lesson. The story concludes when the pattern is finally recognized and the lesson or point is made. I devoted an entire podcast episode to pattern stories. So go back and listen to episode 30 if you haven't already done so. That's episode 30, pattern stories. Now, here's the thing about pattern stories that's so engaging. It's that most people have experienced a similar pattern in their lives where they've made the same mistake multiple times or experienced the same problem in their life or career time after time. I know I have. How about you? Have you ever finally come to the realization after months or years or decades even that you keep doing the same thing over and over again and having the same bad outcome? Has that ever happened to you? Well, then you have the makings of a hilarious or powerful or noteworthy pattern story. So here's the deal. When you're recounting your pattern story of how you kept encountering the same obstacle or making the same bad decision over and over again, the people in your audience are recalling theirs. They really relate to this. Pattern stories are also good for getting a few laughs because you can do some nice self-deprecating humor along the way as it slowly dawns on you that the only common denominator in all of these situations is you. Oh my goodness, I've been there. I've done that. How about you? All right, you ready to move on? Number 7, small disaster stories. For many years, I listened every week to a radio program called A Prairie Home Companion on National Public Radio here in the United States. The host was a man named Garrison Keillor. He was a wonderful and masterful storyteller. And once, in an interview, he was being asked, what makes a great story? And he said, and I quote, "The best stories are about mistakes, failures, and small disasters," end quote. You know, I never forgot that because it's so true. Failures, mistakes, and small disasters. You know, while crucible stories that I talked about earlier are about big traumatic stories, tragedies, and life-threatening situations, small disaster stories are about the everyday obstacles and challenges that happen to all of us. I'm sure you can think of a bunch of times when you set out to do something and something unexpected happened that spoiled your plan. A failure to plan correctly, a mistaken assumption that came back to mess with you, or a small disaster such as a delayed flight that caused you to miss an important occasion, or twisting your ankle while walking the dog, getting COVID. Life happens, right? Bad decisions, misunderstandings, marrying the wrong person. Sorry, did I hit a nerve? Most of the stories that I've told over the course of my speaking career, my look for the limo story, my streaking story, my Bennett leadership story, my pick a date story, they're all small disaster stories. And quite honestly, most of the stories that people have come to me for coaching on are small stories, everyday life stories where something went wrong, something went amiss, an unexpected surprise. But you know what? They're all small disasters. All right, all right. If you don't like that, if you don't like the word disaster so much, maybe they're just major inconveniences and setbacks. But you get the idea, right? And here's the thing, okay? Here's the thing. Your small disaster story can become an amazingly powerful story, a TED Talk story, or a $10,000 motivational keynote story like mine, if you know what to do with it. And that's where my story theater method comes in. My 9 steps of story structure, my phrase that pays concept, all of the tools and techniques and hacks that I have shared with you in my earlier podcasts. If you take the time to develop your small disaster stories, you'll never run out of material because small disasters, Mistakes, failures, and small disasters are everywhere. They happen every day of our lives. So if you haven't studied with me until now, I want you to go back and listen to episodes 2, 3, 4, and 5 and review the basics of my story theater method. Hey guys, this works. My story theater method is great. It really works. People tell me it works all the time. And you could read my book as well. Number 8, game changer stories. Now, here's a story type that you may have never heard of before because I just created it. I call these game changer stories because they're stories about famous people who changed our world, either by their example, such as Nelson Mandela or Oprah Winfrey or Martin Luther King, or because of what they created, such as Steve Jobs, Mark Zuckerberg, and Bill Gates. You know, did you know that Steve Jobs, Mark Zuckerberg, and Bill Gates all dropped out of college? So did Brad Pitt, Oprah Winfrey, and Steven Spielberg. That makes me feel so much better about being a college dropout. Okay, well, what does that got to do with anything? I don't know. I just wanted to say it. Because I don't like talking about Bill Gates without mentioning a woman tech pioneer, because they're there if you look for them. How about Katherine Johnson, the brilliant NASA mathematician who is crucial to the success of the first ever U.S. space flight? They even made a movie about her. You may have seen it, Hidden Figures. There's a movie called Hidden Figures. It's great. Now, not only was she the first female NASA mathematician, she was the first Black female NASA mathematician. Now, she was a real game changer. Game changer stories are fascinating because they reveal details about someone's life that may be surprising, like the fact that Steven Spielberg directed his first TV episode when he was 22 years old, and he was diagnosed with dyslexia when he was 60. He says that was a real revelation. He finally figured out why he was like the way he was. It's because he had dyslexia his entire life. Or here's something interesting. The fact that Elvis Presley, right? Elvis Presley is a natural blonde. Bet you didn't know that. I didn't know that. Okay, so you might not want to build a story around that fact, but you can build an inspiring story about Elvis or Steven Spielberg or John Froelich. I know you don't know who that is, but John Froelich is an inventor from Iowa who invented the tractor. That's interesting. Or Sir Frank Whittle of Coventry, England, who invented the jet engine. Hey, you can discover all kinds of interesting people on the internet, game changers that people would find fascinating to hear about. Whatever point you're trying to make, you can find someone famous whose life story can be used to inspire your audience members that they too can accomplish something amazing. Now, while a lot of these people are considered geniuses, some of them come from very humble beginnings and through sheer willpower, perseverance, and tenacity, accomplished great things. Game changer stories are pretty easy to craft once you do your research. Thank goodness for Google and Wikipedia. You can find lots of biographical detail about game changers by spending some quality time searching around. But hey, if you know someone from your industry or your country of origin who is a game changer more recently, someone who invented something or created something that has made the world a better place, hey, go for it. Number 9, brand stories. Brand stories focus on how a company used savvy sales and marketing strategies to grow their brand name recognition, and then to capitalize on whatever market forces allowed them to expand their brand internationally. Now, brand stories show how a company focused not only on product development, but how that product or service is to be perceived in the marketplace. Brand stories are about making an emotional connection with the buyer by appealing to their desire to live a better life or have a desirable experience. That's why TV commercials about cars don't talk about engines and tires. but about a driving experience or safety. Let's take Subaru, for example. Their cars are known for their dependability, that their cars have a high resale value, and that they're still on the road 10 years and more after purchase. But who buys a car solely because it's dependable, right? I mean, there's a lot of cars that are dependable. There's got to be something else, a sexy design or four-wheel drive or great gas mileage. But there are a lot of cars that can say the same things. So a brand story has to say something different, appeal to something different. So Subaru did something very smart. They decided to tell the story of a family with a dog. Now, in the first scene, we see a young family with young kids and a puppy. In the next scene, it's a couple of years later, the kids are a little older and the dog is bigger. And in the next scene, we continue with the age progression with teenage kids and the dog is older. And finally, in the last scene, the car has aged. The kids have aged and the dog is old and gray. So they show dependability by having the kids and the dog age, which tells us that the car has aged as well. And in another ad, or maybe it's the same one, I can't remember, one of the kids is now a teenager and they're going off to college, and there are now two cars in the driveway, the older Subaru and a new Subaru. And the father, in an emotional scene, gives the keys to the old Subaru to the teenager as she drives off to college. In my mind, this is one of the best brand story campaigns I've ever seen. It's smart, it's emotional, and it appeals to a specific segment of the market. And how did they show dependability? With a story about a family with kids and a dog. And if that doesn't make an emotional connection, I don't know what would. Okay, let's move forward to number 10. Da-dum-da-da-da-da. Number 10, Yoda stories. Not only is he a small green humanoid creature with fuzzy ears and incredible powers, he's a legendary Jedi master who imparts words of wisdom to Luke Skywalker. He's Luke's teacher and mentor. Plus, and this can't be overstated, he has one of the greatest phrase that pays in all of modern moviedom when he says, "Use the Force, Luke, use the Force." What a great phrase that pays. You know what? They didn't even ask me about that phrase that pays. They came up with it on their own. Your Yoda story is about someone who made a huge difference in your life, a teacher, a mentor, a coach, a religious leader, possibly a parent or relative. A Yoda can be anyone who helped shape you into who you are today. They could have taught you a life skill, or they could have said something that has guided your decisions your entire life, a philosophy, or maybe even inspired you to make a career choice you had never thought of without their guidance. You and I have all had teachers, mentors, and influencers in our lives, amazing men and women who left their mark on us. And we need to tell their stories for two really good reasons. The first reason is to honor the people who have shaped us and the lessons they taught us, influenced us to be the person we are today. And second, because when you tell a story about someone who inspired you, you're going to tell it with a level of emotion and reverence that your audience members can feel. And while you're telling your Yoda story, all you need to do at the end is to ask the question of your audience, how about you? Who are the mentors and teachers and role models that have made a difference in your life? And the members of your audience will get emotional too, thinking about the people in their lives who are Yodas. I like to tell Yoda stories because they're not about me. They're about someone that I saw or witnessed who, well, by their example, taught me something important about life or leadership or relationships or something that I internalized. And because they're not about me, they shine a spotlight on someone who otherwise wouldn't get any attention. And it's important to keep in mind that Yoda stories are often about ordinary people. Aunts and uncles and grandparents, friends and neighbors, people who were kind and caring and loving and supportive, who lifted you up when you were down or who showed you what it means to be a good person. I mean, just simply that, what it means to be a good person, values, morals, not with superpowers like Yoda, but with superhuman wisdom and compassion. I want to tell you about my first mentor. It was my dad, Jerry Stevenson. Growing up, I remember him always being at the front of the room, leading meetings, telling stories, being the Boy Scout leader, the Cub Scout leader. No matter what group he belonged to, everybody chose him to be their leader or president. And he encouraged me to give my first speech in Boy Scouts when I was 13. He got me the gig. I can actually see the room that I was speaking in and being up on that platform behind that dais. When I was 13 years old and there was like 150 people in the room, it was a big deal. He was a major influencer in my life. He was my first Yoda. And then my next Yoda was my first acting teacher, a man named Ted Liss in Chicago. He had a huge influence on me. Not only did he push me and guide me as an actor, oh my gosh, did he ever challenge me? It was amazing. But he showed me by his example how to be a coach and to get the best out of people. I mean, I watched him week after week after week coach other people on their acting skills, on their delivery, on their emotion, on their intensity. I watched him draw out the best in everybody in that class. And by doing that, I learned how to do it with you and my students. The thing about Yoda stories is you don't even have to have known the person for them to be a Yoda to you, someone who influenced you in some profound way. In episode 17, Story Leadership, Lead with a Story, I tell the story of Oscar, the CEO of a company that hired me to do a keynote at his company's annual meeting. I watched him give his opening keynote presentation before I spoke, and he taught me by his example a powerful lesson about honesty and vulnerability as a speaker. I'll never forget Oscar. He blew me away. Who are the Yodas in your life? Think about the impact they had on you and the lessons you learned from them, and then honor them with a story. The next story type that I want to talk about are perseverance stories. Stories about how you set your sights on accomplishing something hard, and through sheer determination and perseverance, you eventually achieved your goal. Now, one of the things about perseverance stories is that achieving your goal has to be hard. It's got to be difficult. It has to be filled with lots of setbacks. And for instance, if you're running a marathon, you want to tell a story about running a marathon. It's not just about running the marathon. It's about all the trials and tribulations, the training, the endurance of training, and the injuries and the things that happened to derail your training and to make finally getting to the start line difficult. You know what I'm talking about. This kind of story is about grit and the refusal to let anything stop you from achieving your goal, even if it takes months or years or decades to accomplish. So here's a question. Did it take you 15 or 20 years to finally get your master's degree? And along the way, you had 2 kids and your mom died? Did you ever sit down to write a book? Did you have the intention to write a book? And 10 years later, you finally finished it, but then nobody wanted to publish it. So you had to self-publish it yourself. You had to learn how to be a publisher. Have you always wanted to own your own business? But you needed the steady paycheck of a regular job. So you put it off, whatever that was that you wanted to do, that small business, you put it off until your kids were in high school, but you finally did it. And maybe as you're listening to this, you know what I'm talking about because you're either in that holding pattern and you know you're going to get there. There will be a time when you're going to be able to accomplish that goal. There are a couple of ingredients to this kind of story. The first one is a vision, a dream, an aspiration, something that you set out to accomplish, something that you want to accomplish. The second is a promising start that then collides with mistakes, failures, and small disasters, setbacks. And the third ingredient is time. You have to have persevered over an extended period of time. If there's something that you've set your sights to do and it took a long time to do it, but you finally got there, hey, work on that story, craft that story, script it. It's going to be great. And now we come to the last of the 12 types of stories. Number 12, Minerva stories. Minerva was the Roman goddess of wisdom. That's why I chose this title, Minerva, the Roman goddess of wisdom. So when you use a parable that draws upon ancient wisdom, I call them Minerva stories. And they're often short stories or examples that lend a wise voice from the past to the point you're trying to make. Now, some examples that you can draw upon include Greek mythology, Jewish, Christian, Muslim, Hindu, Buddhist, Sufi, Shinto, and other religious stories and parables. Native people stories like Aboriginal stories from Australia or American Indian stories or first-person stories from Canada. Aztec stories, folk stories from your country's ancestors, African tribal lessons, Nordic and Celtic stories. You get the idea. Every country and every culture throughout history has historical figures that were their wise men and women. And a wise thing to do if you're speaking in a foreign country and you want to ingratiate yourself to your audience is to do some research and find a quote or a story from a well-known historical figure from that culture. Minerva and ancient wisdom stories add a nice touch to any speech or presentation because they show that you've done some research into your subject and are using other resources to lend credibility to your point. So there you have it, 12 story types. And I hope it sets you off on a story safari of your own. Hop onto your imaginary Land Rover and set off in search of the stories you will tell in 2024 and beyond. Maybe, just maybe, you'll stumble upon a Yoda story. Or you'll get caught up in an imbroglio, an acutely embarrassing situation. Or you'll finally find the courage to tell your crucible story. Perhaps you'll recognize a life pattern that you can craft into a pattern story. Or maybe after many years of dedication and discipline, you'll finally reach your goal and be able to share your never give up story. Whatever story you choose to work on, know that when you share it, you'll make a difference in someone's life. And that's what this is all about, isn't it? I tell my stories to help you, to inspire you. And you in turn tell your stories to help someone else. Hey, let's get busy, my friends. Let's find some stories and change some lives. All right, well, that's it for this episode. If you feel that you learned something valuable today, something that you can use that will make your story stick, stories that make you and your business memorable, marketable, and monetizable, there are 3 things I'd like you to do. First, click on the follow or subscribe button and leave a review wherever you listen. And second, share this podcast with your friends and coworkers, your email list, and on social media. And third, connect with me on LinkedIn. And when you're ready to get serious about taking your stories to the next level, or if you have an important speech, presentation, or TED Talk coming up, or if you want some guidance on how to make the transition to becoming a professional speaker, let's schedule your free 30-minute coaching session where we can get to know each other and see if we're a good fit. And as always, I'd love to hear from you with your questions and comments. Let me know that you're out there listening and learning. You can send an email with your questions, comments, and suggestions to Deborah@DougStevenson.com. That's Deborah, Deborah, @DougStevenson.com. Hey, thanks for listening. Until the next episode, I'm Doug Stevenson.